Welcome to Christ Church. The following is a homily from our Sunday morning gathering in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Enjoy.
A few weeks ago, Kristen and I watched a psychological thriller loosely based on Alfred Hitchcock's classic The Rear Window, in which a woman observes a crime at a neighbor's apartment, but everyone convinces her that she did not see what she thinks that she saw. In many ways, that's the way that the 1921 race massacre has been treated. When I graduated from high school, one of the requirements that we had was to take Oklahoma history. And never was the events of 1921 covered in our course. This past week, my family and I were driving back from a family vacation. We spent the night in Memphis, and before heading back to Oklahoma, we went to the National Civil Rights Museum, built at the Lorraine Hotel where Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed. And even there, the Tulsa Race Massacre was not mentioned. How had the deaths of over 300 people vanished from our memories? For those who are not aware, it happened over 100 years ago this weekend on May 31st, 1921. A 19-year-old black man named Dick Rowland was arrested after an encounter in an elevator with a 17-year-old white elevator operator named Sarah Page. We don't know definitively what happened in the elevator, but our best information is that Rowland tripped as he was going into the elevator and bumped into Sarah Page. Page began screaming, Rowland ran, and soon word had spread that a black man had been arrested for sexually assaulting a white woman. An angry white lynch mob gathered in the hundreds gathered outside the courthouse. A small band of 25 armed black men arrived to try to protect Rowland's life, and at the sight of armed black men, a number of white men left to go gather their guns. The crowd continued to grow, and approximately 75 more black men arrived to help protect Rowland. At around 10 p.m., one of the white men demanded that a black World War I veteran surrender his sidearm. He refused, shots were fired, and immediately a gun battle broke out in the streets, killing numbers of people. As the outnumbered black men retreated, the white mob surged forward into Tulsa's prosperous Greenwood district, home of what was called Black Wall Street, a thriving neighborhood of black-owned businesses. What happened next is beyond horrifying. The district was set ablaze. In spite of valiant attempts of self-defense, black Americans were shot dead by the dozens. And there were reports of white attackers dropping incendiary devices, bombs, from the air, from airplanes. By the end of the massacre, an entire neighborhood lay in ruins. Black men and women were herded into internment camps, and the dead were buried in mass graves. Graves that we are only recently looking for. Let's be honest, talking about race is a difficult subject. But race, like many issues, is rooted in our past, in our historical stories. This weekend being Memorial Day, I would normally watch one of my favorite movies, The Longest Day. It's the story of the D-Day invasion and the first steps to deliver Europe from fascism. Peggy Noonan, who was Ronald Reagan's speechwriter, said that the events of D-Day captured the best of the American story, and it's why Ronald Reagan so often turned to it as an image. Maybe you had a relative that served in World War II. Maybe there are stories of valor, bravery, and the sacrifice that you continue to tell. We tell them not just because we are trying to keep a memory alive, but because we want to say this is who we are. But how do we remember the past when there are things in the past that we would rather forget? The author David French reflected on this, and he says, how should the people of God view the past? Should we be defensive of the past? In the book of 2 Kings, in the 12th chapter, gives us part of the answer. In the 18th year of the reign of Josiah, king of Judah, the king ordered the temple to be repaired. And while the temple is being repaired, the high priest finds the book of the law. The king's secretary then read the book to the king, and Josiah's response is profound. He says, "Go inquire of the Lord for me," he says, "and for the people and for all of Judah. Concerning the words of this book that has been found, for great is the wrath of the Lord that is kindled upon us. Kindled upon us because of our fathers who have not obeyed these words, to do according to all that is written." Josiah perceived that God's present wrath for the kingdom's past sin that had present consequence. There was no sense of defense or defiance. There was no deflection and blame. Instead, as the chapter later describes, Josiah tears his clothes and he weeps before God. But he did more than just weep. He changed. The king made a covenant before the Lord to walk after the Lord, to keep his commandments, his testimonies, and his statutes in his heart and his soul, to perform the words of the covenant that were written in this book. And all the people joined in the covenant. Josiah is not alone in this biblical story. Daniel confesses the sins of Israel's fathers. In the book of Nehemiah, the Israelites confess the sins and iniquities of their fathers. In the book of Leviticus, God commands the Israelites to confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers. In short, we cannot and we must not ignore our ancestors' sins. We as Christians should have this as part of who we are because we have remembering of past sins as part of what we do. We should remember our complicity and our quiet. I believe that this is the genius of the prayer book spirituality, captured in the Right One service and previous prayer books. We would pray, we acknowledge and bewail our manifold sins and wickedness, which we from time to time have grievously committed, by thought, word, and deed, against thy divine majesty, provoking most justly thy wrath and indignation against us. We hear the words of absolution, and then we hear the comfortable words, the words from Jesus. "Come unto me, all ye that travail and are heavy laden, and I will refresh you." We tell God the part of the truth of who we are. We are people who are able to commit manifold sins and wickedness. But we also hear another part of the words of Jesus. It's okay. I love you. I forgive you. You're mine. It is not unpatriotic to remember the times that our country has failed to live up to its dream. It is not a denial to remember our country has done great things. Both things can be true. Turn again to David French. "So what do we do?" he asks. Perhaps we can take a cue from the way in which we honor the glories of the past, but with a very different emphasis. When it comes to our great moments, we remember them, we celebrate them, we teach them to our children. We ask them to emulate the courage and the virtue of our heroes and recover the countryside with tributes. It is right, he says, to celebrate, but it is also right, he says, to mourn. When it comes to our darkest moments, we should remember them too. We should lament them, and we should take a page from Josiah and seek reform to ameliorate their effects. Unless we remember our worst moments, we simply cannot truly understand our own nation, nor can we relate to all of her people. humanity has not transformed its fundamental nature in the last 100 years. A nation full of people no better than us can do great things. A nation of people full of people no worse than us can commit great evil. Remembering our nation's virtues gives us hope. Remembering our sins gives us humility. Remembering both of them gives us the motivation and the inspiration necessary to heal and to repair. Amen.